Dallas cops have been ticketing drivers for not speaking English. Have you heard about this story, Lewis?
No.
So a young Dallas cop ticketed a motorist for not speaking English while driving last week. The person had already performed an illegal U-turn. That's why she was pulled over. The city does have a rule requiring cabbies to speak English, but it doesn't apply to average drivers. And that's completely logical. If someone's visiting from out of the country, they are allowed to drive, but they may well not speak English. The police eventually tore the ticket up and said it was both rare and unfortunate that this happened, except it's actually not that rare. The Dallas Morning News reported that since 2007, 38 people have gotten tickets for not speaking English while driving. I mean, this sounds to me like driving while black almost. Most of them got their tickets kicked, but a few ended up actually paying the fines. To me, this is incredibly arrogant. Imagine, Lewis, when you were in Sweden just recently, you rented a car. Mm-hmm. Imagine getting pulled over, and because you don't speak Swedish, you get a ticket. Can you think of any way to squash tourism than giving people tickets if they don't know the language when they get into a car?
That would be huge. Yeah,
it would make it would make absolutely no sense. And Senior Corporal Glenn White said that it's not the fault of the officers who have been giving these tickets. The blame should just be on the higher-ups that programmed the computers to even make driving while not speaking English show up as a possible infraction. And that is a good point, meaning if you're a police officer and you go down and there's a pre-populated list of infractions, if you see non-English speaking driver on there, obviously you're going to assume that it is an infraction. Why else would it be on your computer?
Right.
So let's take a listen. I think they interviewed, this was the daughter of the woman who was pulled over and ticketed. Let's take a listen to that real briefly.
I'm upset. I'm really upset. I was very mad.
Humiliation has turned to anger over what happened to Brenda Mondragon's mother, Ernestina. She drove her 11-year-old daughter, Vanessa, to school this month after the girl missed the bus, and she got pulled over on the way.
She was upset. She was worried.
Dallas police wrote her 3 tickets, no driver's license. She left it at home, darting out the door, plus making an illegal U-turn. And her last crime? Listen to this. She was cited for being a non-English speaking driver.
Okay, so I think we know where this is going to go. The ACLU may very well get involved if they aren't already. Nonsense. The Dallas Police Department needs to just get that removed from the computers. I don't necessarily know that it's the officer's fault. Somebody put it in the computer system, but they should probably know that it's not illegal to drive while not speaking English.
I'm sure now that the story is
in the forefront.
In the forefront, I'm sure it will disappear.
Well, similar to this, hotel owner Larry Whitten is under fire for his treatment of his Hispanic employees in Taos, New Mexico. Some of the things Whitten requested of his Hispanic workers included asking them not to speak English in his presence, and worst of all, telling some employees that he was changing their Spanish first names to sound more American. Here's a 2009 protest from August against Whitten. Here's one former employee.
I was asked to change my name to Mark or Bill, and I wasn't comfortable with that, so I just stayed with Marcos, and they said that I was rude and that I was unlawful, so they fired me.
Okay, and here's Martin Gutierrez, a former employee, talking about how he was fired.
Without warning, he fired us, and there was a bunch of employees that he fired. He brought his own employees from Texas, and I've worked this job with many owners for 5 years, and never has this happened to me, sir.
Right, because everybody in Texas has Anglo-sounding first names. And here's the actual hotel owner, Larry Whitten.
Because I'm in a new area, a new territory. I'm not of Spanish descent, and I do not speak Spanish. I requested that when my employees were in my presence, that they speak English. If a guest comes in that speaks Spanish, by all means, they are to accommodate the guest. If they're in housekeeping or maintenance, they can speak German, French, anything.
Sounds like a great guy. I'd love to work for him.
This reminds me of we have a mutual Indian friend whose name starts with B. His name is Brigesh, and he told us where he worked. People just call him Bruce.
Right, but he's not being forced to adopt an English name.
Right, but that's even what his name tag says, is Bruce.
But it's a joke, right? I mean, he printed that name tag with like a label printer or something like that. Or no, it was a former employee named Bruce, and he just grabbed their name tag.
Right.
I mean, a very different situation. In Afghanistan, it turns out the Taliban is trying to addict U.S. soldiers to heroin. Take a listen.
Right, this all comes as the Taliban and al-Qaeda have reportedly launched a new offensive against U.S. soldiers to get them addicted to heroin. Of course, Afghanistan responsible for 90% of the world's poppy crop. According to the Daily Beast, U.S. intelligence officials say the two groups hope to undermine troop effectiveness while raising cash for weapons and recruiting. They already generate much of the cash at the Taliban through the sale of heroin to the world. It could be a very effective strategy for the Taliban. In fact, here at the morning meeting, sources tell us serious drug use by U.S. soldiers has actually doubled in the last 4 years, and anecdotally, you talk to soldiers in Afghanistan.
Okay. Good strategy to derail American soldiers, get them addicted to cheap heroin. Maybe the upside to this is it'll get a lot of those Hollywood liberals that are always criticized for not being in the military and just criticizing wars. Maybe it'll get them to join the military now that they can get their fix overseas really cheaply.
Tell Robert Downey Jr.
There's conflicting information on whether any of the heroin in the U.S. is from Afghanistan. Some say that it is. Others say that the U.S. heroin is only from Mexico and Colombia. I read that that's the case.
If 90% of the world's heroin comes from one country, you think there's none of that in the U.S.?
Well, you have to figure where is most of it consumed. What I read is that the Afghani heroin ends up in Europe and North Africa. I don't know.
I find that hard to believe.
Sarah Palin's book, her financial disclosures released recently, show that she was paid $1.25 million as a retainer for her book. At 432 pages, that works out to almost $3,000 per page. Not bad. She just had to sit there and tell stories to the writer who actually did the work. Also, in Nordic countries, it turns out that the gender gap is the smallest in terms of salary, benefits, education, and rights. Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Finland are the closest in terms of how much men and women earn and how they're treated. South Africa and Lesotho are two African countries that also made the list. At the bottom of this list, Lewis, Egypt, Mali, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Chad, Yemen, and as well as your dad's home country of Iran, where we know...
I don't think there's any surprise there.
I don't think there's any surprise there. And in the U.S., there's often talk about gender inequality in income. It's very significant with CEOs, which, by the way, many think are overpaid as it is. Female CEOs, not as much, earning 58% less than their male counterparts. Surprising?
Yeah, that's pretty surprising.
I mean, it's a big
high
difference.
Percentage, yeah.
It's a big. We'd have to see how those statistics were put together. Thanks for listening to Midweek Politics. Midweekpolitics.com is the website. Check us out on YouTube. youtube.com/midweekpolitics. It is Fund Drive Week here at our station, Valley Free Radio in Massachusetts. You can donate online, valleyfreeradio.org. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back with more next week.